Hello everyone. Today's book is not only one of the best horror books of the year, but in my opinion, it's one of the best horror books I've ever read, at least in the last 10 years. It definitely goes on that list of the best of all time, and that's saying a lot. And obviously I completely enjoyed this book, and I can't wait to tell you about why I think that. But first, as always, I want to remind you that I have books for sale. And if you want to read any of the books you see on your screen, I just reduced the price of all of them to just $1. So there is a link down below if you want to purchase my books, and you can do so at that link for just $1. All right, let's get started. So the book I'm going to be talking about today is called Black River Orchard by Chuck Wendig. And yes, this is one of the best horror books of the year. And in my opinion, it's one of the best horror books of all time. It's a book I'm definitely going to be reading multiple times, just like I do with all my favorite horror books. And here's a sentence I thought I'd never say. But this is one of the best horror books of all time. This is one of the most terrifying horror books that you'll read this year. And this book is about apples. Yes, this book is about apples. And I never thought I would say such a sentence in my life, that a book about apples is one of the best horror books ever. But 2023 has been a weird year, and here we are. And it's absolutely true, by the way. I don't like comparing people to Stephen King. You know, you see a lot of reviews and people will say, this is the next Stephen King. Stephen King is Stephen King. Chuck Wendig is Chuck Wendig. I will make this comparison though. The thing I love about Stephen King books, for me personally, are his characters. The way he writes characters, that they are so instantly recognizable. We know these characters. The way he describes them, they're instantly familiar to us. And then he takes these characters and he puts them in situations that they are so ill-equipped for that we never know if they're going to live or die. In all honesty, most of them probably should die because they have no preparations. They're not special in any way to deal with the things that Stephen King puts them through. And I think he does that better than any other author, which is why I love his books so much. So I will make that comparison because this book reminded me of that. It is Stephen King-esque in regards to the characters. These are rich, interesting, diverse characters. They are so well-rounded and well-developed. You know these types of people. You're familiar with them. And during the course of this book, as they change either for the better or most of the time for the worse, it really has that emotional impact on the reader. At least it did for me, because they are all going to change in one way or the other. And yes, this is a book about apples. Particular apple in particular, that a man plants 7 of these trees in his orchard, and this apple is one that nobody has ever seen or tasted before. And when they taste it, it's like a little bit of heaven in their mouth, like nothing they've ever had. But when they partake of this apple, something happens. There is an evil that grows out of the ground into these apple trees and into the fruit of those trees, and people that eat them start to become, I don't know if you want to call it infected, you can call it that. If you want to call it a possession, I guess you can call it that. But gradually they all begin to change, and sometimes this change seems to be good. Like if they hurt themselves, their bodies start healing. If they were wearing glasses, all of a sudden their vision clears up. If they have arthritis, all of a sudden they're pain-free again. There's a glow to their skin. They seem to be younger, have more vitality and energy than they ever had before. But that's only on the outward side. Inside, something much worse and much more frightening is happening, because they lose their ability to have empathy. They lose their ability to have sympathy. They are narcissistic. They believe that they are the better versions of themselves, and any non-apple eaters are completely inferior to them and mean nothing to them. And this is going to start to show in some of the horrific, brutal things they will do to their friends, to their family members, and others if these people did not partake of the apple. And pretty soon, there starts to become a cult formed around the people who have eaten these particular apples, the apple eaters. And then there's a small group of non-apple eaters that are suffering horribly the consequences of their family members and friends being part of this cult. And pretty soon this cult starts having like a hive mind, that whenever the leader of this cult is threatened or feels a certain way towards somebody, it affects and infects all the rest of the people who have eaten this apple to go out and do these horrible, terrible things to these people. And that's all I want to say about that. I do want to say that this book, I think the physical copy is like 600 pages or something, so you might consider it kind of a doorstop. But I can tell you this, when I was reading, I didn't pay attention to that. At no point in this book did I ever look down and go, oh, I'm only on page 300. I got a long way to go. I wasn't paying attention to the page numbers because I was so engrossed in the story with these characters, seeing how at the beginning you're going to feel certain ways about some characters, and by the end, and gradually over time, but by the end you're going to feel completely different because of the way that they're changing, and how this author kind of puts in these little scenes where you might think there's still some hope for these characters you loved at the beginning, even though they're turning into these just horrible people because of this infection of the apple. But he puts in these little bits of hope, leading us along, hoping that they'll change. And sometimes those hopes are just going to be crushed. And it's an absolutely emotional experience, a fully engaging emotional experience when you're reading this book. And there's a lot of twists. There's going to be a lot of turns. And I also want to say that you can tell this author put a lot of research into apples, into facts about apples. But he doesn't put them in here like a dry lesson you would hear in college or school. You never knew you wanted to know so much about apples until you read this book, because he makes all this knowledge, real life knowledge about certain apples, very entertaining, and it's integral to the story, especially a couple of characters who in this book are apple hunters. They seek out apples that have long been thought to not exist anymore. They find those branches, graft them into a tree, trying to bring them back to life. That's a real thing, by the way. Up until the point of this, reading this book, the only thing I knew about apples was this: I want an apple, I buy an apple, I eat the apple. And that was it. But I feel like I'm much better off knowing about that an apple is not an apple, that there are so many different varieties and ways that they're grown and the process of growing them and things I never thought I'd want to know. But he puts them in there and just makes them such an integral part of the story that you are entertained by that. And without that knowledge, some of the things that happen in this book might not even make sense. But because it's in there, it just fits the flow of it. It's never boring. It's never dry and dull. This book is just excellent. I loved everything about it. 5 out of 5, 10 out of 10. Best horror book of the year. One of the best horror books of all time. All that jazz. And I will gladly give those accolades to Black River Orchard by Chuck Wendig. And there is a link below. This book comes out on September 26th. So not too far away. There is a pre-order link in the description where you can get your copy. And I cannot recommend it enough. You definitely need to read this book. And as always, I want to say thank you for taking some of your time, spending it here with me. And until we meet again, keep reading spooky, my friends.